Candace Owens is being sued by the First Lady of France, and this case is absolutely insane. Candace claimed Brigitte Macron is actually a man named Jean-Michel, that she stole her dead sister's identity, and that she never gave birth to her own kids. Now the Macrons are coming for blood with the same high-powered attorneys who took down Fox News for nearly $800 million. So I brought in Joe Sibley, the attorney who stood by me when the New York Times came for my reputation. He's gone up against these same lawyers, defended Rudy Giuliani, and he knows exactly how dirty these cases get. We're talking forum shopping, blood tests, identity theft allegations, and whether Candace Owens could actually lose everything. This isn't just about one lawsuit, it's about the future of free speech and whether creators like us could be next. I'm Ari Jacob, and I actually got past a motion to dismiss in my own defamation case, which is extremely rare. Most of these cases die before they even begin. And that's why I cover the kind of cases that expose cancel culture, weaponized media, and what happens when powerful people want to shut you up or drag your name. And this Candace Owens lawsuit, I don't know if the Macrons are being unfairly canceled, if Candace has any truth to her allegations, or if Candace was just stirring the pot to grift attention. But either way, it's messy, it's political, and it's kind of dangerous for the freedom of speech and the First Amendment. So if you care about the truth or creators getting sued into oblivion, perhaps to silence them, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.
Here is Ariadna Jacob,
social media expert and creatorgenius.com founder, Ari Jacob.
The influencer whisperer linked to the explosion of TikTok superstars.
her name is Ariadna Jacob.
Her story is the American dream story. Immigrant from Mexico, father dies when she's 2, makes it on her own by herself, self-educates, self-trains, self-starts to create a little business, going up against some of the nastiest, most vicious people in the world and winning.
She's the bully, but she's calling you an abuser. I hope you end this. And nobody has the stones to fight back, so thanks. Ariadna, I found that really interesting.
I'm excited to introduce Joe Sibley.
I'm Joe Sibley. I'm an attorney. My law firm is named Camara Sibley. We do basically complex cases, any case that's kind of interesting that we think is a good fit for us. One area of specialty that I've kind of gotten into over the years is defamation law, which implicates First Amendment law, constitutional issues, and things like that. So that's something I do a lot of, defamation cases and cases of that nature.
A lot of people from my channel know you as my personal hero.
Wow.
You took on Taylor Lorenz. So do you just want to quickly just talk about how we met and why you decided to take that case on?
Yeah, I think we met kind of in the midst of COVID or right after COVID happened, and all sorts of stuff was wrong with everybody's lives at that point, but you had a particularly bad hand dealt to you because of what happened after that article came out and the damages that ensued. I just kind of believed in your case. I believed in you, and it was just time for somebody to try to rein in. It's not an easy thing to do against a media defendant, especially the New York Times, but we did about as much as we could do. And, we demonstrated that we had a meritorious case and that wrongful conduct had occurred on behalf of the New York Times. They never admitted that. Lorenz never admitted it, but I think the public record and the evidence we put forward demonstrated that. And I think a lot of people were inspired by that case because it was one of the first cases that actually got past the initial, just to get out of the gates with a defamation case is difficult because courts are routinely dismissing these cases on various grounds. And we were able to get past that initial threshold. And, so that was a victory.
Yeah. Can you kind of explain why is it so hard just to get past a motion to dismiss? I think, normal people, when they look at a defamation case, myself included, or when, an issue of defamation, you think, okay, I'm just going to sue them. And then if they posted something, if they wrote something that was incorrect and they did it on purpose, then, I'm going to win. But what I didn't realize was that you don't even get discovery. You don't get really anything. So can you explain that in layman's terms?
If you file in a federal court, most federal courts at this point do not recognize state laws. They're called anti-SLAPP laws. And basically what that stands for is strategic lawsuit against public participation. So there are laws that say, hey, if you file a lawsuit against someone based on their free exercise of, speech or petition, we're going to have this expedited dismissal procedure in place that basically forces you to come forth with a meritorious case right out of the gate. And if you can't do that for whatever the reason, whether it's factual or legal or whatever the case, then your case is dismissed, and usually you owe attorney's fees and potentially sanctions. So litigants generally will choose federal forums if they can, because most federal courts don't apply the anti-SLAPP law, as was the case in our case. There's still a motion to dismiss procedure. And basically what happens is the court looks at your complaint and says, based upon these facts that you've pleaded, if a jury were to believe that, they were true, you could succeed on a case for defamation. The problem with defamation is that because it implicates constitutional rights, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, there is a whole minefield of doctrines that the court will apply and defense attorneys will apply to try to get the case dismissed. There's too many of them to go into here, but you're right that the average person says, oh, you said something that was false, on social media or whatever, you're going to get sued into oblivion. It just doesn't work out that way. Even usually for private individuals, even if you're not a media outlet, usually it's very difficult to make out a defamation case, to get it past the finish line, to have an award stand up under appellate scrutiny. It's just very difficult. I mean, you saw the Sarah Palin case, right? I mean, she got all the way to trial. Like, the jury was in deliberations, and then the judge said, I don't think there's enough evidence here. I guess I should have granted I think the argument was he should have granted a directed verdict, and so they renewed that argument. And then the judge basically took the case away from Sarah Palin when the jury was deliberating. I think it wound up going up on appeal and she got another shot, but then she lost. So it's just very difficult to win these cases.
And the judge let them deliberate, but then he had already made his decision publicly. So a lot of jurors got text notifications and things like that. So if you're a juror and you know that the judge already made a decision, you're probably going to side with that judge, right?
And I think she got a new trial on that basis, but then she lost again, if I recall correctly. But, the bottom line is it's just judges. I mean, in some ways it's a good thing, right? Because if you could sue anyone for, sort of innocuous post, even if it might be false, right? I mean, sometimes things are false, but they're not necessarily that harmful. And we just can't have everyone suing each other over, expressing their ideas, because obviously that would play in favor of people who had more money and small people who are not, don't have the money to defend these lawsuits. What would they do, right? Like, you could be silenced by litigation.
Right.
So that's why it's like that. In the Candace Owens case, the one that, has been making news, the case was actually filed in Delaware State Court, which is kind of a unique venue among states because the anti-SLAPP statute there is not quite as strong as it is in other places like New York or California. And that's actually the same venue. Most people recall the Fox News settlement with Dominion, the voting company, the $787 million set. I think that's what it was. That was also filed in Delaware State Court. And it was filed by the same lawyers, some of the same lawyers who filed this case. So
have you gone up against those lawyers?
So we are up against those lawyers in the Dominion case with Giuliani. It's in federal court though in Washington D.C. That case is still ongoing, so we haven't gone to trial. There haven't been summary judgments filed. I expect that to happen sometime in the near future. It's in a federal venue.
So what specifically, you obviously went over the lawsuit. What's kind of the overview? Why are they suing her? What did she say that triggered the lawsuit? Was it just that she said that allegedly Macron is a man and that, or was there a lot more to it?
Yeah. So when I first heard about this, my initial thought was, if Candace Owens is accusing Brigitte Macron of really being a trans woman, which is what it sounded like, right? That she was born a man and then transitioned to a woman. That doesn't seem defamatory to me, right? Because I can't imagine a court making a ruling that says calling someone a trans person when they're not is a bad thing, right? Because basically you're saying being a trans person is a bad thing. Some people might think that's a bad thing, but I can't imagine a court making a ruling that says that's a bad thing and you defame some. It would be like if you accuse someone of being gay. I don't think a court would make a ruling that said being gay is bad, right? Because in order to be defamatory, like actionable defamation, it can't just be false. It also has to be something that calls people to look negatively at you, right? So like if you said something false about someone that was, for example, if I said that you won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 2015, that would be false, but it wouldn't be defamatory because no one would view you less for that, right? Like that's not a defamatory statement. So accusing someone of being a trans person isn't defamatory, in my opinion. I think that would be a problem. But when you look at the lawsuit, that's not really what the argument is. The argument is that they're accusing Brigitte Macron of lying about being a trans person. And lying is something it is actionable defamation. It can be, but it's a lot tougher to prove because lying isn't just making a false statement. Lying is making a false statement with knowledge of its falsity. So it gets into mental states and things like that. I think this is going to be an interesting case, though, because one of the other components of this is that Candace Owens has accused the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, and his now wife, Brigitte, of entering into a relationship that she has, I think my understanding is she characterized it as pedophilic, right? I think Brigitte Macron was around 40 years old and Emmanuel was around 14 or 15 when they, entered into their relationship. And, maybe in France, maybe that's normalized, or maybe it was normalized at the time, but here it's not, right? So one issue is going to be, if the laws of France allowed that relationship, if it was legal, because the age of consent is much lower in Europe, can you be liable for defamation in the United States for calling someone or accusing someone of pedophilia where it might be legal in their country, but not in your country? In certain Middle Eastern Islamic countries, you can marry a girl when she's like 9 years old or something at some ridiculously low age. Okay. So if people here accuse someone who does that and say, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or wherever it might be legal, and I don't know whether those jurisdictions actually it is legal, but certainly it is. There are some places where that happens. Could that person come to the United States and sue you for defamation, right? Like, you called me a pedophile when in fact, it's totally legal and there's nothing criminal about it. So that's a problem, right? How do we define where the reputation is harmed? Is it in France? Is it around the world? Is it in the United States? So this is going to be an interesting case for a lot of different reasons. I don't know that there's ever been anything quite like it, right? There's never been a world leader is certainly not a sitting world leader, who has filed suit in a different country against a media person, whether it's a mainstream media or not, for defaming them, right? I mean, that's very strange.
What about all the people that call Michelle Obama a man? I mean, does that come into, so then all those people could be sued technically by the Obama?
I mean, that's one of the problems with this case, right? Is that if this is allowed, I mean, again, I don't think it would be actionable defamation to make the claim, false though it may be, that Michelle Obama is really a man who transitioned to a woman or is pretending to be a woman. The claim is that she's lying, that she's dishonest.
Like fraud of some sort.
Right.
Like using a birth certificate or things like that.
Or just misrepresenting her identity to the public, misrepresenting the fact that she was or was not born a woman. In this particular case, though, in the Macron case, or there's another layer to it, as I read the lawsuit, what Macron is claiming is that they're claiming that Candace Owens accused Brigitte Macron of assuming her sister's identity. In other words, that there's a sibling whose identity she assumed, and she's actually the brother of that sibling. So there's a component that says not only did you accuse us of lying, but you accused us of identity theft. That's actually in the lawsuit.
Do they quote all the statement in the videos or all that? Or because I know Candace, I think, went on and said they're not putting the full context of what I said, things like that.
They do make quotations. Of course, the quotations contain ellipses, so there's certainly more context there that they don't include. I haven't listened to all of these statements, so I can't really comment on the entirety of the context. What I can tell you, though, is that in defamation law, one of the standards for determining whether something's defamatory is reading the statement made in the entire context of which it was made. You can't just isolate statements and decide whether they're defamatory, because sometimes statements are made in the context of kind of rhetorical hyperbole or exaggerations where no one would really take it seriously. Sometimes those statements can be made in such a way to where there's other statement in the same passage that clarify it or, add some context to it that doesn't necessarily make it have the same meaning. So I haven't done that, but I don't think anyone would really dispute. You can just do a search on YouTube. So I think she has a whole series about Brigitte Macron, right? So I don't think there's any real dispute that she is making the claim that Brigitte Macron was born a man and transitioned to a woman. I don't think there's any dispute about that. So the question is going to be for the court, is it a viable defamation claim to accuse someone of being a transgender person and lying about whether they're a transgender person and passing themselves off as a, sex assigned at birth woman when really you were born a man and you transitioned yourself to a woman, or your gender identity as a woman. It's kind of an interesting issue, though, because for years now, we've heard from some people that gender is fluid and that gender is not really objective. I mean, that's the whole Matt Walsh, what is a woman thing, right? So is the court going to make a fact determination about what defines a woman and what defines a man, right? I mean, that's going to be an interesting issue. When Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was being confirmed before the Senate, one of the questions she was asked was, can you define a woman, or something to that effect? And what she said in response is, well, I'm not a biologist, right? Which then raises the question of, how does she know she's a woman? Did she consult with a biologist before she claimed to be the first Black woman appointed to the Supreme Court? But the court is going to have to make some sort of fact determination about what a woman is and what a man is. And that's going to be interesting, right? Because, everyone knows that we've heard for so long that you can't really define it. It's not objective. So is this court going to come out with an opinion that says woman means XX chromosome, you're born with, so there's a lot of issues here that I'm not sure how it's going to come down. If I were her lawyer, I would be doing everything I could to get this case out of Delaware. I would be trying to get this case into Tennessee, because the only basis for them filing this in Delaware is that her LLC and some company, I think, that facilitates the broadcast have their place of incorporation. They file their papers in Delaware, which a lot of companies do, right? They pick Delaware because of tax law or whatever. But all of the broadcast, headquarters, all that stuff, it's all in Tennessee. So I would be making the argument that the proper forum for this would be Tennessee. If she can get the case moved to Tennessee, then I think that changes things, right? Because she's probably going to get a more favorable judge, definitely going to get a more favorable jury, right? Like, a jury in Tennessee is going to be much more favorable than a Delaware jury for this, since she's known as a right-wing commentator. This, to me, is the most interesting defamation case that I've seen since I've been practicing law, just because of these issues that have come up.
Do you think that this case against Candace will survive a motion to dismiss?
Well, it's a good question. I think in Delaware, it most likely would survive a motion to dismiss. I don't think they could get it dismissed in Delaware because, yeah, I just don't see a Delaware court. I mean, they tried the same thing in the Dominion case with Fox News. It's just, they don't have the dismissal statutes there, just don't have the same teeth as they do elsewhere. I doubt there's going to be a favorable judge. I don't know who the judge is assigned to this case, but I have a hard time believing they're going to be able to get it dismissed. I think they could get it transferred potentially for like a forum nonconvenience. It's an argument you make when you say, hey, this is not the right court for this to be in. It should be, all the witnesses, et cetera, are in Tennessee. But I don't think they're going to get it dismissed on a substantive ground that, hey, it's not defamatory, or I think it's possible that could happen in Tennessee. Yeah.
Do you think that attorneys likely reviewed the documentaries, and how for example, my experience, the New York Times twisted words, right? They were very specific about how they said things in order so that they could obfuscate responsibility for things that was going to cause me damage, such as somebody else alleged XYZ. But in some of those situations, I think that's what got Taylor into trouble, was that she was quoting somebody else, but we had already given her information that was exculpatory or whatever information. From my opinion, Candace had to have had attorneys or somebody review the documentaries before she posted them, because she seems extremely confident. Do you think, how would her lawyers allow her to do this? I guess.
I would not be so confident that occurred.
Okay.
I mean, it's possible. I don't know one way or the other, but I wouldn't be surprised if she just didn't believe they would ever actually pull the trigger on it. Because a lot of times people send letters and they threaten and they say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Nothing ever happens. She might have just thought they'll never do it. I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if she just did it without having it seems pretty clear that she really believes this. Whether she should believe it will be a question for another day, because that'll be the ultimate question, is whether she had any good faith basis to make these claims, which we don't know that. But yeah, the issue is going to be ultimately, what was your state of mind when you made the claims? Now, based on what I've seen, she appears to have done a lot of digging into this issue, and she appears to really believe that this is true. It seems to me, though, that what you would do is, if you were Brigitte Macron and you really wanted to prove that you were a biological woman, why would you not just give a blood test or whatever testing you do? That should be relatively easy. And I would expect that Candace Owens is going to ask for that in discovery, which would be a very strange, I've never been in a case where, I guess that happens in paternity cases and family law, but in defamation law or civil litigation, that's relatively rare. That's usually a case where someone's accused of a crime or something and they're giving biological evidence, not for a podcaster, right? That's a little strange, but that would seemingly that would end it, right? If
what happens if they give it and then it's female DNA? Then does she automatically lose this lawsuit?
I don't think she automatically loses. Of course, I'm sure if you were representing her, you would need to make sure that it was the right, agree on the laboratory and make sure that it's her specimen, whatever there would be all that. But no, I don't think it means she loses, because I think there are some real issues here about, even if she's not telling the truth, even if it's false, and even if she knew it was false, there are just certain problems with this case that I think are going to make, I don't know if it'll be resolved at the trial court level. This may be an issue for the Court of Appeals, might be an issue for the Supreme Court. I don't know. We're treading on some new ground here with this case. So even if it turns out that Brigitte Macron, demonstrates through this case that she is a biological woman, was born a biological woman, I still think that means that it doesn't necessarily mean that Candace Owens loses the case.
What do you think about the 33-page retraction letter? Is that like a big part of this? The fact that she ignored it? In my case, obviously, Taylor Lorenz ignored a lot of things that we gave her. What proves reckless disregard for the truth? Maybe she believed it, but she had reckless disregard. Is that kind of just subjective
So-
for the judge?
So that's a good question. That's an interesting question. And the way the law treats that is it's not entirely based on the subjective belief, right? There are some people who it doesn't matter how much evidence you show them, they're still going to believe whatever they want to believe, right? So it's not about whether someone subjectively believes a particular thing. It's about whether the objective, rational person, if presented with whatever evidence it is, would still maintain that belief. And so what they're going to say is, look, we sent you the letter. We sent you every form of documentation that you would need to know that you're wrong, that she's not lying about her identity, et cetera, et cetera. And if it turns out that they win this case, still maintaining that position would show evidence potentially of actual malice, that she knew that it was false. And even when presented with evidence of falsity, she still held to that belief and continued to publish defamatory things. That would be the argument they'll make. And that's why it demonstrates actual malice, which they're going to have to prove because they're public figures. And it also would justify punitive damages, right? Or exemplary damages. So yeah, I think what she's going to say, and I haven't followed it that closely, but from what I understand, her response was, she was asking for more evidence or asking for this or that. It just seems like this should be disposed of really quickly, right? The first thing out of the gate should be, this is something we can know the answer to this question. So there shouldn't be a lot of protracted discovery about this.
Yeah, well, so if you're saying, so a rational person might say, well, if they didn't send me the blood sample that could have put this to bed right now before I even published, then maybe there's some rationale for thinking it's true. I mean, I don't know, I don't watch the series and I don't really have an opinion either way, but I think you could say that because they didn't send that thing that could put it to bed right away, somebody might have some questions.
I think that is what she's probably going to say. Now, from her standpoint, again, if Brigitte Macron were to have sent whatever tests, whatever test this is, I don't know. I've never had to go to the lab to get a test for whether I'm a guy, so I don't really know what the test is, but whatever that is, I'm sure Candace Owens would have said, well, I'm not going to accept that. I don't know who gave the specimen, right? So it would have to be a situation like where you do a drug test, where you go to the lab and they verify it's you and you give your sample. So, but yeah, I mean, that's going to be an issue. But look, when we had these issues come up in the 2020 election, as many people recall, they genuinely believed that there was election fraud. And that, there was a lot of shenanigans going on with what was happening with the election. And people got held accountable for actual malice, even though they actually believed it. Like, genuinely believed it, because courts ruled, and I'm not saying I agree with the ruling, but courts ruled, well, you should have known that there was no election fraud because of this government report or that government report. And no reasonable person would still hold to that belief, right? So some things have come out since then, after the last election, that have called into question some of those government reports we got from 2020. But, the point is that it's not enough to just say, I genuinely believe it. There's an objective person standard that the court will impose. And if the court finds you to be someone who is not a normal, rational person, like, most would not hold to this belief if they were presented with this evidence, you can still be held accountable for, because otherwise you could defame anyone you wanted if you just sincerely believe in the falsity of whatever, or the truth of whatever you're saying, even if presented with all available evidence to the contrary, right? I mean, you could just continue to maintain that belief. And, you can never fully know what someone's subjective belief is, right? There has to be some objective standard to hold people accountable. Otherwise, everyone could defame everyone and always get away with it.
What about the fact that sometimes it's hard to prove damages, right? And let's just say that they succeed in proving that Candace defamed them. How damaged will Candace end up being? We know that the claims had already been stated in the past. We already know that the Macrons don't have a great reputation. I think she was videotaped slapping him on a plane, and then she admitted to meeting him when he was very young as his teacher. So her reputation is not pristine as it stands. And then she's, as far as I know, she's not a writer, a presenter, a talent, an actress. Like, how are they going to prove the damages?
That's a good question. I don't know what exactly their damages are going to be, because you're right. There's already been reputational tarnish on these people for a variety of reasons. One of them is that someone else had already made these claims. And so it was already out there. I mean, so let's just assume, and I don't know the answer to this question because I don't know French law, but let's just assume that however they met and however their relationship started was totally legal, that there was no legal problem with it. Most people still find that extremely creepy, right? That you have a 40, almost 40-year-old person that's a teacher to a 14, 15-year-old, and they wind up in a relationship and getting married. Most people find that, regardless of whether it technically was a legal violation, that's still looks really bad on your reputation, right? I mean, when you already have that out there, it's difficult to say. I mean, if they're right about this defamation, I think it would probably be considered defamation per se, because it's accusations of dishonesty and deceit. So it would probably be defamation per se means damages are presumed. You still have to prove damages, but there's presumed damages. But I don't see a lot of, normally big defamation cases as far as damages are where you have special damages. And special damages are situations where, hey, because you said this false thing about me, I lost $100 million in business, right? Like all these clients of mine just stopped doing business with me because they believed what you said. So here's my damages. When it's just purely reputational injury, it's a little more difficult to prove, right? Because it's hard to put a number on it. I'm not really sure. I don't even know how they would prove an actual economic loss, right? He's a government official. She doesn't work. Like they haven't lost any profits from anything. I mean, unless they had some kind of speaking engagements or something that they claim they lost. I don't know. Quite frankly, I don't think this case is about the damages. I think this case is about presumably vindicating their reputation, although Candace Owens is not a particularly well-received personality by people on the political left. She's been very critical of the Macrons and other world leaders. So I'm sure people are going to speculate that the real motive here is trying to silence her and get rid of her podcast. And
well, I think people online are speculating like it's just going to bankrupt her, and all these things. And then I think some people are saying that if this goes forward and she loses, then it gives those same attorneys and the plaintiffs the ability to go after anybody that repeated it, like Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn and things like that. And I think that would be like pretty dangerous if that really is the case. But I feel like they have to be hard with it, just like they are with every other defamation case. Otherwise, it could open up a whole can of worms, right? Like with the First Amendment.
yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. I mean, if I called the president or dictator or whatever of North Korea, if I call him a murderer because of whatever's happened in North Korea, that's totally legal in North Korea because he gets to make the law. So could he sue me in American court for falsely accusing him of committing a crime when in North Korea, sending people to labor camps and forced starvation and things like that are totally acceptable? This is the problem with this case, is that whatever standards of conduct that are okay in France, I don't think the average American probably agrees with that, right? I mean, the French are, quite frankly, a little weird when it comes to stuff like that. And so can you impose your cultural standards for reputation, right? Because otherwise we can't, as Americans, we can't comment on other nations' cultural practices that we find abhorrent, right? I mean, we find them wrongful, we find them gross, we think it's, whatever we decide to call it. Can they then could be anybody. It doesn't have to be a world leader. It could be a businessman or something that says, hey, I don't appreciate you calling me a pedophile for marrying a 9-year-old. Now, if I married a 5-year-old, that would be pedophilia, but 9-year-olds are okay where I'm from, right? So, I mean, this is the problem with this kind of case. And I'm not sure, this is going to be the other question, is whose choice of law will apply here, right? Because normally in defamation cases, it's the forum of the plaintiff is the law that controls normally.
Wow.
So you could make the argument that French law applies here for defamation. But that's a problem because Candace Owens has a US constitutional First Amendment right. So how do we balance a US constitutional right with French defamation law? Because as we know in Europe, they don't have the same rights that we do for freedom of speech, right? Like they don't get to say things that we get to say. So that's going to be interesting. I would imagine that they're going to argue that US law, that they're going to apply US law, because I don't think a court constitutionally can impose some other jurisdiction's
that's
law on an American citizen when it arises from the American citizen's right of constitutional speech. I'm just, like I said, this is why I think this case is so interesting. There's a complexity of issues here that I've never seen before. I mean, maybe it's happened, but certainly not to a level of this notoriety.
With Alex Jones, that one wasn't an issue of the damages, like actual damages. That was, he lost the amount of damages he did because of how egregious it was, or how it's kind of like that was punitive damages, or
So I think it was a combination. With Alex Jones, you had a lot of plaintiffs. It wasn't just one person. You had mental anguish damages. I don't know if everyone knows about this case, but essentially the case involved accusing some of the parents in the Sandy Hook shooting of fabricating the claims and being crisis actors, or whatever the claim was, that the kids didn't really die. I mean, that's a pretty egregious thing for a parent to deal with. I think Alex Jones actually admitted he was wrong about that. But those cases involved punitive damages. That's the kind of case where I can see a jury really whacking somebody for, right?
I think that the part of the Candace thing that people are saying egregious or harmful is that she's basically saying that the kids weren't birthed by her, they're not her kids. Then I guess that's one of the main ones that people are saying, like, if somebody said my children weren't my children and they really belong to somebody else. But again, I've seen people say that about Michelle Obama, and other politicians in the United States. So I can't imagine, I think one of the reasons why they changed the standard for actual malice wasn't it because in like 1964, when there was the landmark case, New York Times versus Sullivan, that the media was trying to criticize politicians because of the civil rights movement. And in order to allow journalists to cover those types of cases without, even if they accidentally got something wrong, like the newspapers were being sued into oblivion, and there had to be some freedom of the press in order for there to be fair criticism of politicians and things like that, right?
Yeah, so that case has a different standard for what we call public figures. So public figure can be either a general purpose public figure, like, for example, the president would be a general purpose public figure because he's so well known that he's just always the subject of news. Or you can be what's called a limited purpose public figure, where, maybe for a particular issue, you've become known for commenting on COVID or whatever it is. And so for purposes of that issue, you're considered a public figure, which means if someone says something about you, they have to have said it with knowledge of falsity. Now,
And in the place that we're living today, I almost feel like anybody that has a social media account could be considered a public figure.
that's a good point. Obviously, when that case was decided, the universe of who had a megaphone to disseminate information to the people was very limited, right? Because it was
Right.
pretty much legacy media, and maybe you had some local newspapers. Now, there's been sort of a democratization of journalism of sorts, right? We have all these people on podcasts and on social media and YouTube or whatever, and they're all giving their own little stories about reports about whatever. They're using AI to do it. I mean, that's, this stuff's happening all the time. So I believe there's not been a case that I'm aware of that specifically holds this, but if you have your own social media account and you're commenting on whatever it is you're commenting on, you're putting yourself into the public spotlight. I mean, you're putting yourself in the public forum and you're discussing the issue. I believe that person then becomes a public figure, certainly for purposes of that issue that they're discussing. I mean, there are some who are probably become, Matt Walsh at this point, for example, surely Joe Rogan, but someone like Matt Walsh even, is probably a general purpose public figure at this point. He's fairly well known. So you're going to have more and more public figures because more and more people have access to the public now, whereas before they did.
Is there any type of protections for the media that she would be considered like a journalist or a citizen journalist? She doesn't have to give up sources. Like, could she say, well, I have this information that provided by sources that makes me believe that, what I said was true, but I don't have to give that up. There was a lot of things like that that I didn't understand when we sued the New York Times, that I was like, well, why don't we don't get everything, every communication, things like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know whether she'll be able to avail herself of that kind of privilege, confidential source privilege. However, what I can tell you is that you can't use it as a sword and a shield, meaning that she can't claim it's true and I believed it was true because so and so told me this, but I'm not going to tell you who that is. Right? You can't use that as your defense. If you're going to use the source to create your state of mind, which is, I believe that it was true, and here's what I did to inform myself, you've got to give up the source. Otherwise you can't, right? I mean, it would be like you making an advice of counsel defense, right? I mean, if you say my lawyer told me to do it, okay, great. Let me see what your lawyer, no, I can't show you that, right? You can't do that. So once you put it at issue, now you can't claim privilege on it. So I doubt that's going to be an issue for her. I mean, I think she's probably going to divulge everything and put everything out there. I think this is one of the problems in defamation cases, right? When you file suit for defamation, things that you didn't expect might become part of the public record now will become part of the public record. So I would expect she's going to put everything out there, every salacious, possible thing that pertains to these people. There's been some pretty salacious accusations. I think it's all going to come out. But again, this is a strange case where the truth or falsity of these statements could more or less be determined through a lab test. That's kind of crazy. That can happen. But it will be interesting to see what happens if that test occurs and if it comes back that Brigitte Macron has the XX chromosome, right? Like, how will Candace Owens respond to that? Will she issue an apology? I don't know. If the test comes back I can't imagine she would give the test. If Brigitte Macron knew that she was born a man, I just can't imagine her agreeing to do this test, right?
That there's nothing that's going to make her do it, give the test, obviously.
Well, I mean, I suppose the court could order her to do it, right? I mean, that's something that could, potentially be ordered. Again, I've never heard of this happening in a non-sort of paternity case setting. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where it's happened. It's just very strange to have something like that be an issue in a civil case, certainly a defamation case, right? So,
right.
But if she refuses to do it, then that's going to raise a lot of eyebrows, right? I'm happy to give a test anytime to prove I'm a guy. I'm sure you're happy to give a test anytime to prove you're a woman if someone questioned it. I mean, there's other ways we could prove it, but that's one way you could do it. Who would have a problem with that? That would be very strange to object to that test if you're Brigitte Macron.
Final prediction. You're in Vegas. You're putting it all on. Is Candace cooked and going bankrupt, or this thing's going to get, either it's going to get dismissed or she won't face like any type of big consequences? What are you putting it on?
So I'm going to bifurcate this. If it stays in Delaware, I think she's going to lose. And I think it probably will not be an insignificant amount. I mean, that is assuming that there's not a blood test that's done that demonstrates that Brigitte Macron is actually a biological male. Outside of that potentiality, assuming that what the Macrons are saying are true, I think if it stays in Delaware, she's probably going to lose at the trial court. She's going to have to try to find a way to get it fixed on appeal based on some novel questions here, right? So you're going to have to ask the Court of Appeals to make some big calls on constitutional issues. This is something that I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. Supreme Court took this case at some point, if it actually gets that far. If she's able to get it moved to Tennessee, however, I think she has a pretty good chance of getting it thrown out either on a motion to dismiss. I don't think the average Tennessee jury is going to be very favorable towards the Macrons. So I can't imagine that they're going to get some huge verdict that would be in the sphere of a bankruptcy situation. But if it stays in Delaware, I mean, look, I can't speak for Fox News, but I think there's a reason why Fox News paid the amount they paid to Dominion in that settlement. And I think the reason is because they knew they were in a bad forum. Sometimes when you're in a bad forum and you have a judge that is hostile and you have a forum that's not favorable, there's, sometimes there's not much you can do. You've got to hope you can get it fixed on appeal.
Okay, interesting. Well, I think that, I mean, I haven't watched any of the specials or anything like that, or any of the episodes that she put out, but I have a feeling whichever way it goes, it's going to be very particular on the detail of like exactly what was said, exactly how it was said, because, I just saw like in our thing and so many things that were false, and this was false, but it's not necessarily defamatory. This was, this could be considered opinion. I think even like, looking at her in the, the pedo department, that could be potentially opinion, right? Like, I don't know. I just think it'll come down to very specific things about what were said with all the context there.
Agreed.
But yeah.
But she said a lot of things. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of material, and she's continuing to say things.
Yeah.
And
She's
that's
going on Tucker Carlson on Friday. Oh, one other thing I was going to ask you: what would you be telling her if you were her attorney right now? To not talk.
I think any attorney. I mean, I don't think this is a controversial opinion. I think any attorney would tell her not to make any further comment on it until the litigation is over. I mean, that's because all you're doing is creating more. I had a case that most people know about where we're in court 1 minute for one case, and the client is on the steps of the courthouse telling the press things about the plaintiffs, and there's a new lawsuit filed by the plaintiffs while we're in trial for another lawsuit. So it's just, I understand people who are in media, podcasters, you want to stick to your guns, you want to double down. That from a lawyer standpoint, I don't think any lawyer would advise her to continue making statements about the Macrons at this point, because it just creates a lot of problems. But
Right.
she's going to do what she doesn't seem like the kind of person, who's, I mean, she seems pretty bold, and, I hope it works out for her in the sense that I hope this doesn't, I mean, I like her. I think she has some interesting things to say. I don't agree with a lot of the things she says, but she is a unique voice, and I think everyone's voice needs to be heard. We need differences of opinion. I just hope this doesn't wind up being something that ends her career as a podcast. Let's hope not.
No, I don't think that. Yeah. Well, and it's not fair that the big New York Times and people like that get away with it all the time, and then they can just go after a podcaster or something like that to silence them. So hopefully the judge that gets this or whatever, that they're just as hard on letting it go forward as they are with other stuff that's not political, maybe. But it is interesting how politics and the venues and the judges and the places that all plays a big part in it. Unfortunately, it seems like just the nature of the beast with anything in civil litigation. Any forum, it seems like it matters.
It definitely matters. I mean, there's reasons why certain courts and certain places are where plaintiffs' lawyers will file lawsuits, because it becomes licenses to print money at certain points. Yeah, I mean, look, the lawyers that are representing the Macrons are very good lawyers. Tom Player is a very esteemed First Amendment lawyer, so they have excellent legal representation. They would be a formidable opponent in any forum. But yeah, there's a reason why they picked Delaware State Court.
Okay, well, thanks, Joe, for joining me. This is going to be interesting. Hopefully you can come back once we learn more, or if Candace says any more egregious things, maybe they'll put some more things. And can they add things to the lawsuit if she keeps
100%.
going?
100%. I mean, there's going to be a cutoff where they can't add more claims, but I would be surprised if they don't add more. claims based on this,
Interesting.
because that's also a bad for a jury, assuming a jury's favorable to them. That's a bad optic. It's, not only did we send the retraction letter, but after she got served with the lawsuit, still made these statements. So this is more reason why you, jury, should award, whatever these damages are. So
Right.
of course, I have no doubt they're going to use it.
Joe, where should everybody find you? Or I know you're not big on social media, but you have a law firm, and maybe there's other people that want comment on this. What do you think?
You can email me at Sibley, Sibley, at Camara, Camara, Sibley.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much, and
Yeah.
we'll see you guys next time.
All right, we'll see you.